There's a moment, quiet, small, unassuming, when the silence becomes heavier than sound. Not peaceful, not comforting, but dense, fleshing, like a room with no exit and no windows, like a sky that stopped looking back. You pray, or maybe you don't. You ask, or maybe it's more like begging. You kneel, or you curse, whisper, rage, collapse, and nothing answers. Not even a whisper, not even a sign. It's not that you've lost faith, it's that you feel left, not punished, not judged, just left alone. And it hurts in a way most people can't describe, because it's not physical pain, and it's not sadness either. It's something more raw, more stripped down, like someone has quietly walked out of the room and you're not sure if they'll ever come back. This isn't a crisis of belief. It's worse. It's the absence of belief, or rather, the absence in belief. Imagine God as a fire, not a bonfire, not a forest blaze, a candle, flickering, steady. You warm your hands over it every night. You talk to it. You trust that even when everything else goes dark, this small flame will remain. And then one day, it's gone. No smoke, no wind, no reason. Just the feeling that someone who used to be there isn't anymore. And you're left in a room that still remembers the heat. Everyone has lived some version of this, whether they use the word God or not. It's that stretch of days where everything you do feels hollow. You go through the motions, work, friends, messages, routines. But deep down, there's a silence that screams. Not loud, but persistent. It hums beneath everything, and it makes the world feel paper thin. You try distractions. You try to be rational. You tell yourself it's just a phase, that you're tired, that you need more sleep, more sun, more time. But you know it's something else. It's that silence. The feeling that the universe, or God, or whatever you used to believe in, has stopped answering. And here's the strange thing. It happens after you start to take the spiritual life seriously, not before. The silence comes after the first prayers, after the initial awe, after the books, the rituals, the moments where you really thought you felt something shift in the air. That's when the silence arrives. That's when the abandonment starts. And maybe that's not a mistake. Maybe it's part of the design. Think of it like this. When a child first learns to walk, the parent holds their hand. Every step, every wobble. But one day, the parent lets go. They don't disappear. They just step back. They let the child fall, tremble, stand up again. Because holding on forever means never learning to walk alone. What if God does the same? What if divine silence isn't neglect, but permission? Permission to grow, to walk, to fall, to not need constant confirmation. Maybe faith isn't hearing answers. Maybe real faith is walking anyway, even when no one replies. So when God leaves you alone, what if it's not abandonment? What if it's the beginning of something deeper? A deeper kind of relationship, one that doesn't depend on emotional highs or miracles or divine signs. One that isn't measured by how close you feel, but by how honest you're willing to be, even in the dark. In this video, we'll explore what it means to be left alone by God. We'll walk through the desert slowly. We'll talk about absence, not as failure, but as formation. And we'll try to understand why the silence might be the answer you never wanted, but desperately needed. Because maybe, just maybe, when the divine goes quiet, it's not the end of the conversation. It's the start of your own voice. It starts with a question, not a theological one, not philosophical, just a raw, childlike whisper, "Where are you?" Not in a church, not in a crisis, but maybe in the bathroom mirror at 7:40 a.m. on a Tuesday, when your face looks older than yesterday and the toothbrush trembles slightly in your hand. Or maybe it's in the crowded subway, or while folding laundry, or after you've closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and the silence in the room is so complete it feels like it's pressing on your chest. And the question surfaces again, slowly, painfully. Where did you go? We like to imagine faith as a warm blanket, constant presence. But more often, it's like walking through fog with no guarantee of arrival. And the fog isn't just around you, it's inside you. A dense, humid emptiness that muffles everything. And in that fog, the silence isn't just absence. It's accusation, because you've been good. You've tried. You've read the books. You've lit the candles. You've whispered prayers with sincerity that almost embarrassed you. You've reached for something beyond the veil. And still, no voice, no miracle, no divine hug, just bills, just bad news, just flat coffee and existential dread. Just a sky that never cracks open. And that's when the ache begins. The truth is, we're not wired for divine silence. We're wired for feedback. Babies cry, and someone lifts them. Students raise their hand, and someone answers. You text a friend, and they text back, or you start to panic. We want signs, signals, echoes. So when God falls silent, it feels unnatural. Like the conversation is broken, like we were talking to the dark, and it didn't care to answer. But maybe what we're really grieving isn't God's absence. It's our own expectation. We were taught, implicitly or directly, that the sacred should speak, should comfort, should intervene. We imagined a God like a divine customer service line. Press 1 for peace, 2 for purpose, 3 if you feel spiritually abandoned. But God is not a vending machine. And the sacred is not always soft. In fact, the real sacred, the untamed, unfiltered sacred, is often quiet. Not out of cruelty, but because some lessons rot when they're over-explained. Because some truths grow better in the soil of struggle. And maybe, just maybe, this silence is not the absence of love, but the form it takes when love trusts you to keep walking without hand-holding. Still, it hurts. Let's not pretend otherwise. It's not poetic. It's not noble. It's not romantic. It feels like being ghosted by the cosmos, like standing naked in front of a locked cathedral, like watching everyone else receive the miracles while your inbox remains empty. You see others weep during worship, feel led to decisions. You hear stories of encounters, revelations, visions, and all you have is this numb space in your chest, a space once filled with fire, now just ash. And that discrepancy is its own torment. But here's something nobody tells you. That ache, the hollow, breathless ache of a God who doesn't answer, is universal. Moses felt it on the mountain. Job felt it in the dust. Jesus felt it in the garden, sweat like blood on his forehead, whispering, "Why have you forsaken me?" This silence has ancient roots. It's part of the sacred script. And somehow, knowing that doesn't fix it, but it grounds it. Because maybe what we call silence is not the sound of abandonment, but the threshold of a deeper initiation. Try this. Imagine being in love with someone who never speaks. They just sit in the corner of the room, watching, breathing. You pour your heart out. You cry, you confess, you scream, and they just look at you, eyes full of something you can't name. No response, no movement. But somehow, you feel seen. It's not what you wanted, but it's also not nothing. That's what spiritual silence can become. Not rejection, but presence without performance. Not punishment, but a mirror that reflects the only thing left. You, your voice, your longing, your faith, naked and unscripted. In the end, we ache for signs not just because we doubt, but because we care. We ache because we're reaching, because we want to know that the cosmos sees us, that this life means more than survival. And that ache, paradoxically, is a sign in itself. not from God, but from your soul, saying, I still believe there's more, even when it's quiet, especially when it's quiet. There's a strange kind of loneliness that doesn't scream. It hums, low, constant, like a fluorescent light in a hospital hallway. You don't notice it at first, but it wears on you. That's what spiritual silence does. It doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in, like cold water through your socks, like fog creeping under the door. And slowly, the ache morphs into something else, a quiet suspicion that maybe you were wrong to hope in the first place. You begin to reframe. You tell yourself it was just emotion, a youthful phase, a moment of weakness dressed as transcendence. You start removing the sacred from your vocabulary, not violently, gently, surgically, word by word. You stop saying blessed. You start saying lucky. You replace grace with good timing. You stop praying, or rather you forget how to, not out of anger, but numbness. Because what's the point of calling out if no one's listening? But here's where the spiral deepens. That numbness isn't just apathy, it's protection. It's your soul covering itself with layers, thick, scarred, and quiet. Not to forget God, but to survive without Him. This is the spiritual wilderness, not a punishment, not a detour, but a place, an actual place in the geography of the soul. And in the strange cartography of the sacred, the wilderness is not a place you pass through. It's a place that works on you. Think about it. The most formative moments in every ancient sacred narrative don't happen in temples or palaces. They happen in deserts. Moses doesn't meet God in the courtroom of Pharaoh. He meets him in the burning bush after years of exile. Elijah doesn't find God in the storm or the fire or the earthquake. He finds him in the whisper, on the mountain, alone, suicidal. Jesus, too, begins not with a miracle, but with silence. 40 days, no crowd, no sign, just hunger, heat, dust, and the sound of his own heartbeat. Why? Because the wilderness is the place where illusion dies. In the noise of the world, it's easy to mistake applause for presence. It's easy to assume you're connected because you're surrounded. But solitude strips that away. And in that stripping, you come face to face with the unbearable truth. You don't know who you are when nobody is watching. Not your friends, not your parents, not your mentors, not even God. And that's when real identity begins, not from affirmation, but from absence. Not from hearing a voice from the sky, but from listening to the quiet soil under your feet. The wilderness doesn't teach by answers. It teaches by lack, by confronting you with the edges of your own dependency. It shows you what you actually believe, not what you say you believe when everything's going well. And if you're willing to stay, to stop running, numbing, or faking, you start noticing things, not signs, not revelations, but rhythms, subtle things, like how silence has a texture, how your breath feels when you're not performing, how a tree, unmoving, still testifies to something older than despair. And most of all, you learn to sit, not because it's pleasant, but because it's true. Here's the paradox. You came to the wilderness thinking God left you. But maybe, just maybe, God led you there, not to punish you, not to abandon you, but to empty you of pretense, of comfort, of borrowed beliefs. Because sometimes the only way God can reach the real you is to remove everything else you've mistaken for Him. Still, that doesn't make it easier. The nights are long, the doubt is sharp, and the temptation is always there to turn back, to go back to shallow certainty, to crowd-pleasing spirituality, to soft sermons and feel-good mantras. But something in you resists, not because you're strong, but because you've tasted something deeper, even if only for a moment. That stillness you felt on a walk one evening, that unnameable ache when you held someone's hand in grief, That sudden hush in your spirit when the wind shifted and you just knew. Tiny things, barely noticeable, but enough to make you stay. In that staying, transformation begins. No fireworks, no vision, just roots growing in the dark. Because maybe God is not a voice to be heard, but a presence to be trusted, even when it's quiet, especially when it's quiet. And in the end, the wilderness doesn't just test you, it shapes you. You entered looking for God. You leave having found yourself. And strangely, that self is more capable of recognizing the divine than ever before. Because now, you know, silence is not the enemy. It's an invitation. There's a moment, if you sit long enough in silence, when you begin to notice something eerie. Not an answer, not a revelation, but a presence that feels suspiciously like it's not that nothing is there. It's that what's there is barely there, like the ghost of a hand you once held, like breath fogging up glass that's already starting to clear. And this is where the soul either breaks apart or breaks open. Most of us prefer our gods loud and responsive. We want signs, coincidences, sudden clarity. We want our pain to mean something. We want prayers to echo, not evaporate. But silence is cruelly honest. It doesn't play to your expectations. It doesn't flatter your theology. It doesn't rescue you from the hard questions. It just sits with you, unmoving, uninterested in your emotional weather. And in that space, the sacred doesn't vanish. It becomes fragile, no longer a fortress of certainty, but a delicate web of longings. No longer a king on a throne, but a flicker behind your ribs. This is the new terrain, the architecture of absence, where faith is no longer a ladder you climb, but a tightrope strung across the unknown. Every step is a risk. Every moment is unbalanced, but still you walk. Not because you're sure, but because something in you refuses to sit still. That's the paradox of faith. When God feels absent, you don't walk toward certainty. You walk with your uncertainty, like a shadow beside you, like a limp you've learned to live with. We don't talk enough about that kind of faith, the kind that wakes up and prays, not out of hope, but out of muscle memory. The kind that volunteers for love, even when it feels like a losing game. The kind that lights a candle, knowing full well the darkness won't flinch. That kind of faith isn't glamorous. It's not made of mountaintop moments or euphoric tears. It's made of repetition, ritual, small, stubborn acts of choosing meaning when meaning doesn't announce itself. It's choosing to plant seeds, even if you may never see the harvest. Imagine this. A woman walks into a chapel she hasn't entered in 10 years. She doesn't kneel. She doesn't cry. She doesn't even believe. Not really. She just sits. The room is empty. The air smells of dust and old wood and wax. She doesn't say anything, but her breathing slows, and something in her chest, tight for months, loosens, just slightly. She leaves after 10 minutes. Did anything happen? In the old model of faith, no. No miracle, no sign, no divine voice. But in the new model, in the architecture of absence, everything happened. She showed up. She let herself sit in the presence of not knowing. She trusted silence to hold her without fixing her. And maybe that's the most radical form of prayer left to us in this modern, exhausted age. Because here's the thing, when God feels absent, we assume he's gone. But maybe he's waiting, not in the clouds, not in thunder, but in the spaces you've stopped rushing to fill, in the pauses between your scrolling, in the ache between your sighs, in the part of you that wonders, just for a moment, if absence is its own kind of presence. There's an ancient Jewish tradition called the Tzimtzum. It teaches that when God created the world, he had to contract himself, pull back, to make space for something that was not him. Absence, in that view, isn't abandonment. It's permission. A divine stepping back so that something new, fragile, real, human can emerge. That idea haunts me. What if God's silence isn't rejection, but restraint? What if He's not ghosting you, but gifting you the space to become something truer than before? Not a puppet, not a parrot, but a person who can stand, even wobble on their own soul. Because here's the deeper spiral. If God is love, and if love in its purest form does not control, then maybe God's greatest act of care is to step back, not to disappear, but to let you breathe, to let you learn how to carry His absence without letting it crush you, to discover that maybe, just maybe, you're not alone in the dark. You are becoming the kind of person who can recognize God even when He's not speaking, and maybe that's the most sacred gift of all. There's a strange kind of wisdom that only grows in dry places. Not in the lush gardens of certainty, not in the sparkling waters of religious ecstasy, but in the parched lands where your prayers crack before they reach the sky, where silence doesn't feel sacred, just cruel, where you whisper, "Where are you?" And the only answer is your own voice echoing back. It's the desert. It's the desert, that ancient, unforgiving landscape, not just geographical, but existential. And it's there, precisely there, that something begins to shift. The desert doesn't give you answers. It strips away the questions you didn't need. It doesn't teach you how to perform faith. It teaches you how to live it, barefoot, dust covered, with no audience but the vultures. This is the final spiral in the architecture of absence, learning that God's silence may not be punishment, but invitation. An invitation to a kind of intimacy that only grows when all the noise has died. Think of all the ancient prophets and mystics. They didn't find God in palaces or debates. They found Him in caves, on mountaintops, in nights so long they forgot what dawn felt like. Even Jesus, before His public life began, went into the desert. Why? To wrestle with shadows, to face the silence, to meet a God who doesn't shout. Because maybe the voice of God isn't always a thunderclap. Maybe it's what's left after everything else has fallen away. The ego, the roles, the spiritual pride. What remains is what's real. What remains is what cannot be faked. Let me give you an image. You're in a desert at dusk. You're hungry, your lips are cracked, your legs ache, but there's something holy in the air. Not because you found God, but because you stopped pretending you ever had Him on a leash. And then, not in a blaze, not in a miracle, but in a flicker, you feel peace. It's not loud. It doesn't erase the ache, but it's real. You understand in your bones that you don't need proof to keep walking. You just need presence. And sometimes, presence is nothing more than this, a heart that keeps opening even in the dark. Here's what I think we often miss, that God might sometimes step back not to hurt you, but to let you step forward, out of borrowed beliefs, out of second-hand spirituality, out of the need to be constantly reassured, and into something raw, something yours. In that space, you don't pray to manipulate outcomes. You pray to stay awake. You pray not because it works, but because it roots you to something deeper than proof. You pray because you're human, and something in you refuses to go numb. So, what does this look like in real life? Not much, maybe. Just someone closing their eyes on a crowded train and mouthing a name they're not even sure they believe in anymore. Just someone lighting a candle without asking for anything. Just someone sitting in their car, gripping the wheel, whispering, "Help," even when they're not sure who's listening. That's the quiet revolution. That's where the soul does its real work. In spaces too small for performance. In acts too simple to go viral. That's where faith matures. Not into certainty, but into stability. A deep, unshakable willingness to remain open to something greater even when it feels like the sky has gone silent. And in that, maybe, God hasn't left you alone at all. Maybe He's trusted you with your own becoming. Not dangling signs, not forcing belief, but stepping aside, like a parent hiding just out of view, watching you take your first unsteady steps. It hurts, yes, but it's sacred too, because it means your faith is no longer borrowed. It's yours, held not by answers, but by a love that trusts you to walk alone. So when God feels absent, remember this: you are not abandoned. You are being initiated, not into a doctrine, but into a deeper way of living. A way that holds questions without needing to crush them. A way that honors the ache. A way that whispers, I am here. I may not be what you expected, but I have never truly left. Maybe we've made too much noise about God. Too many declarations, too many arguments, too many grand certainties that only seem to echo in the rooms we've built for ourselves. But when the noise fades, when you're no longer trying to impress or convince anyone, there's something incredibly honest that remains. Not lightning bolts, not perfect theology. Just a quiet kind of faith. The kind you don't talk about much. The kind you carry like a stone in your pocket, heavy, grounding, real. Sometimes faith is waking up and choosing not to close off. Sometimes it's letting yourself weep, not because you're weak, but because you're still open. And sometimes it's laughing unexpectedly on a day you thought would break you. No signs, no voices in the clouds. Just you here, still trying, still choosing to love. Still praying, not for answers, but for the strength to stay awake in a world that numbs. So if it feels like God has left you alone, maybe it's because He trusts that now you can walk a little further on your own legs. And if you stumble, if you doubt, if you fall, well, you're not failing, you're growing in the most human, sacred way possible. Because the truth is, some deserts are only survived by those who learn how to sing. Even if the song is a whisper, even if no one hears, even if you don't yet believe every word, that too is prayer. That too is holy. Let's think together. Not forever, but just long enough to build something real.